The transport ship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of Velkari Prime, and Katie Brooks gripped her seat, while alarms screamed through the cabin and red lights flashed everywhere around her. She had been a cargo pilot for 5 years running supplies between Earth colonies, but this route was new and dangerous because it skirted too close to Velkari space, where ships had been disappearing for months. The engine explosion came without warning, and suddenly Katie was spinning through space, in an escape pod, watching her ship break apart into burning pieces that fell like shooting stars toward the purple planet below. Her pod hit the ground hard, and Katie blacked out for several minutes before waking up with blood running down her face and her ribs screaming in pain every time she tried to breathe. Through the cracked window of her pod, she could see 3 suns in the alien sky, and the air outside shimmered with heat that made the strange blue trees in the distance wave like they were underwater. Katie pushed open the pod door and stumbled out onto orange sand that burned through her boots, and she knew immediately that she was in serious trouble because this was not any human colony. The sound of engines made her look up, and she saw 5 sleek ships approaching fast with designs she had only seen in military briefings about the Velkari Empire that ruled this part of the galaxy with brutal force. Before Katie could run back to her pod, the ships landed and dozens of tall aliens emerged wearing armor that reflected the light of the 3 suns and carrying weapons that hummed with energy. The Velkari stood 8 feet tall with blue scaled skin and 4 arms that ended in clawed hands, and their leader stepped forward, speaking in accented English that sounded like grinding metal. "You are trespassing on sacred Velkari ground, human, and the punishment is death, unless you can provide entertainment for our princess who grows bored with the usual prisoners." Katie raised her hands slowly and said, "My ship crashed and I need medical attention," but the alien leader just laughed and shot her with a stun weapon that made her muscles lock up before everything went dark. She woke up in a cell made of energy bars that buzzed and crackled when she got too close, and through the transparent walls she could see dozens of other cells containing different alien species. A small green creature in the cell next to hers pressed against the energy barrier and whispered that she was in the grand arena where Princess Zara made prisoners fight for sport, and very few survived more than 1 match. Katie tested her injuries and found that someone had healed her ribs and the cut on her head, which meant they wanted her healthy for whatever came next, and that thought made her stomach twist with fear. Hours passed before guards came to her cell and dragged her through corridors carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light, and the air grew colder the deeper they went into the arena complex. They threw her into a preparation room where other prisoners sat in silence, and Katie noticed most were missing limbs or had terrible scars that told stories of previous battles they had somehow survived. A human man in the corner looked at her with hollow eyes and said, "They will make you fight until you die, and the princess watches every match from her throne, like we are nothing but animals for her amusement." Katie sat down next to him and asked how long he had been there, and he laughed bitterly, saying time means nothing here but maybe 6 months, and he had survived 15 fights, which was a record for humans. The door burst open and guards began pulling prisoners out one by one, and Katie could hear the roar of a crowd growing louder with each person taken until finally they came for her. They pushed her through a tunnel that opened into blazing sunlight, and Katie stepped into an arena filled with thousands of screaming aliens all calling for blood, while drums pounded a rhythm that shook the ground. High above, on a platform made of crystal, sat a figure in flowing robes, and even from this distance, Katie could see the crown that marked this as Princess Zara, who held the power of life and death. The princess stood and raised one hand, and instantly the entire arena fell silent as her voice carried across the space, saying, "Today we have a new human female who thinks she can survive what others could not." Katie stood in the center of the arena, feeling very small and very alone as she waited to learn what horrible thing they would make her fight, while the crowd began chanting words she did not understand. The princess sat back down and waved her hand lazily, and gates on the teal opposite side of the arena began to open with a grinding sound that made Katie's teeth hurt and her heart race with fear. From the darkness beyond the gates came a sound like thunder, and Katie saw eyes glowing red in the shadows before a creature emerged that made the crowd gasp and cheer with bloodthirsty excitement. It stood 12 feet tall, covered in black scales, with teeth like swords and 6 legs that ended in claws that left deep gouges in the arena floor, and Katie knew with terrible certainty that she was meant to die here. But as the creature charged toward her, something inside Katie refused to give up. And she thought about Earth and everyone she would never see again. And that gave her the strength to dive sideways at the last second. The crowd roared as the beast skidded past her and Katie rolled to her feet, already looking for anything she could use as a weapon, but the arena floor was smooth and empty, except for Sand Princess Zara leaned forward on her throne watching. This new human who moved differently than the others with a grace and determination that was unexpected and oddly fascinating to observe. The creature turned around faster than something that size should be able to move, and Katie barely had time to jump backward as its massive tail swept through the space where she had been standing. Katie noticed the beast favored its front right leg, and she remembered something her military training instructor had said about every creature having a weakness, if you could stay alive long enough to find it. The crowd was shouting and stomping their feet, creating a thunderous noise that made it hard to think. But Katie forced herself to focus on the creature as it circled her like a cat playing with a mouse princess. Zara found herself gripping the arms of her throne as she watched this human female dodge another attack with perfect timing, and she wondered why this particular fight felt different from the thousands she had witnessed. Katie picked up a handful of sand and waited until the creature opened its mouth to roar, then threw the sand directly at its eyes, making it shake its head violently and stumble backward in confusion. The momentary distraction gave Katie time to run toward the arena wall where she had spotted a piece of broken metal, probably left from a previous fight, and she grabbed it just as the creature recovered. Now armed with something sharp, Katie felt slightly less helpless, but she knew the makeshift weapon would not penetrate those thick scales, so she needed to find a soft spot somewhere on the beast. The creature charged again, and Katie slid under its belly, dragging the metal piece along its underside, but it just scraped harmlessly against the scales, and she rolled away before it could crush her. Princess Zara leaned forward and whispered to her advisor that this human was lasting longer than any before her, and the advisor nodded, saying, "Perhaps humans were evolving to be stronger fighters." Katie was getting tired, and her breathing came in ragged gasps as the heat from the three suns beat down on her and sweat stung her eyes, making it harder to see the creature clearly. The beast seemed to sense her exhaustion and moved in for what it thought would be the killing blow. But Katie had been watching its patterns and knew it always attacked from the left side. At the last second, Katie spun to the right and jammed the metal shard into the creature's eye with all her remaining strength, and the beast screamed a sound that made everyone in the arena cover their ears. Purple blood sprayed from the wound as the creature thrashed around wildly, and Katie dove away, rolling across the sand to avoid being hit by its flailing claws and tail. The crowd had gone quiet, watching in disbelief as the massive beast stumbled and fell to one knee, still screaming, while Katie stood on shaking legs, holding the bloody piece of metal like a sword princess. Zara stood up from her throne without realizing she had done it, and her silver eyes were wide with something that might have been admiration or shock, or possibly both. The creature made one last desperate lunge at Katie, but being half blind, it misjudged the distance, and Katie stepped aside, letting it crash into the arena wall with enough force to crack the stone. Katie walked over to where the beast lay stunned and climbed onto its back, then pressed the metal against its throat and looked up at Princess Zara, waiting for the signal to finish it or spare it. The princess raised her hand, and the entire arena held its breath. Then she made a gesture that meant mercy, and Katie dropped the weapon and slid off the creature's back as medical teams rushed in. The crowd exploded in angry shouts because they had wanted to see death. But Princess Zara silenced them with a wave and announced that this human had shown intelligence and mercy, which were rare qualities. Katie collapsed to her knees in exhaustion and relief, while the princess continued speaking about how most fighters just tried to survive. But this human had studied her opponent and found victory through strategy. Guards approached Katie to take her back to the cells, but Princess Zara called out for them to stop, and everyone turned to look at her in surprise, including Katie, who could barely keep her eyes open. "Bring the human to the medical chamber and give her the best treatment available," the princess commanded, and her advisor whispered that this was highly unusual for a prisoner. Princess Zara ignored the advisor and watched as they helped Katie walk out of the arena, and she found herself wondering what made this particular human so different from all the others. In the medical chamber, Katie lay on a healing bed while alien technology repaired her exhausted muscles and the medical staff whispered among themselves about why the princess had ordered special treatment. A doctor with green skin and 6 eyes told Katie that she was the first human to defeat a razor beast without killing it, and that had impressed the princess, who usually showed no interest in the fighters. Katie asked if she would have to fight again tomorrow, but the doctor said the princess had not given any orders about that yet, which was strange because usually prisoners fought every 3 days until they died. That night, Katie was moved to a better cell with an actual bed and fresh water, and through the window she could see the palace towers where Princess Zara lived, surrounded by luxury and power. She wondered what kind of person could watch others fight for entertainment and then show mercy and kindness, and Katie realized the princess might be more complex than just a cruel royal, unknown to Katie. The princess stood at her own window, looking down at the prison complex and thinking about the human woman who had fought with such grace and intelligence instead of just brute force. Zara's younger sister, Princess Lyra, entered the room and said everyone was talking about the human who had captured Zara's attention and asking if the rumors were true. What rumors? Katie asked, and Lyra laughed, saying that Zara had never shown interest in any fighter before, but had personally ordered medical care and better quarters for this human female. Princess Zara turned away from the window and told her sister it was simply respect for a worthy opponent, but Lyra smiled knowingly and said she had never seen her sister stand up during a fight before. The next morning, Katie woke to find a tray of food that actually looked edible and a clean set of clothes that fit properly instead of the rags she had been wearing. A guard arrived at Katie's cell and told her that Princess Zara had requested her presence in the royal viewing chamber, and Katie felt her stomach tighten with worry about what this might mean. The walk through the palace was unlike anything Katie had seen before, with walls made of living crystal that changed colors and floors that seemed to float above nothing but empty space. They entered a room where Princess Zara stood alone, looking out at the arena below, and when she turned around, Katie saw that up close the princess was strangely beautiful, despite being so alien. Zara's silver eyes studied Katie for a long moment before she spoke, saying, "You fought differently than any human I have observed, and I want to understand why you did not kill when you had the chance." Katie met the princess's gaze steadily and replied that killing for entertainment was not something humans did, and that mercy was considered a strength on Earth, not a weakness. The princess walked closer, and Katie noticed she was actually shorter than expected, maybe 7 feet tall, and her blue-scaled skin had patterns that shifted like water in moonlight. Zara asked if all humans thought this way, and Katie explained that humans had learned that violence only led to more violence and that showing mercy could sometimes turn enemies into allies. The princess seemed genuinely curious and asked Katie to tell her more about Earth and human culture, which was not what Katie had expected from someone who forced people to fight for sport. Katie talked about cities where millions of different people lived together and about art and music and how humans had learned to explore space, not through conquest, but through cooperation. Princess Zara listened without interrupting, and Katie noticed her expression changing from cold curiosity to something warmer and more interested as she described human families and friendship. When Katie finished talking, Zara was quiet for a moment, then said, "Her people believed humans were primitive because they were physically weak, but perhaps they had been measuring the wrong kind of strength." Katie asked why the Velkari made other species fight in the arena, and Zara's face darkened as she explained it was tradition going back thousands of years to prove Velkari superiority. "But you do not seem to enjoy it," Katie observed. And Zara looked surprised that a human had noticed what her own people had not seen or chosen to ignore. The princess admitted that she had never enjoyed the games, but as heir to the empire she had duties and traditions to uphold, even if they felt wrong. To her, Katie took a risk and stepped closer to the princess, saying that traditions could change, and that someone with Zara's power could make things different if she wanted to. Zara laughed bitterly and said her father, the emperor, would never allow such changes, and that even suggesting it would be seen as weakness that could cost her the throne. They stood in silence for a moment, then Zara asked if Katie would join her for a meal, and Katie realized this was not a command but an actual invitation, which seemed to surprise them both. The dining hall was empty except for them, and servants brought food that Katie could actually eat while Zara asked endless questions about human society and technology, and philosophy. Katie found herself enjoying the conversation and noticed that when Zara relaxed, her whole demeanor changed from cold princess to someone who was genuinely interested in learning. They talked for hours, and Zara told Katie about growing up in the palace, always knowing she would rule, but never being allowed to question why things were done certain ways. Katie shared stories about her childhood on Earth and her dream of exploring space to find new worlds and new friends, which made Zara smile for the first time. The smile transformed Zara's face completely, and Katie felt something flutter in her chest that she tried to ignore, because falling for an alien princess was definitely not part of any plan. Over the next few days, Zara continued to summon Katie for meals and conversations, and they walked through the palace gardens where purple flowers sang in harmonious tones. Zara showed Katie the royal library with books made of light that contained the history of 100 worlds, and Katie taught Zara human games like chess, which the princess learned remarkably fast. Other members of the court began to notice the time their princess spent with the human prisoner, and whispers spread through the palace like wildfire about what it might mean. Zara's advisor warned her that showing such favor to a human was causing talk and that her father would not approve, but Zara dismissed his concerns with unusual sharpness. Katie, meanwhile, was torn between her growing feelings for Zara and the reality that she was still a prisoner, and that hundreds of other beings remained trapped in cells waiting to die. She tried to convince Zara to free the other prisoners, but Zara said it was not that simple, and that moving too fast would cause the nobility to revolt against any changes. One evening, while they watched the three suns set from a balcony, Zara suddenly asked Katie if she missed Earth and wanted to go home if she could. Katie thought about it carefully, then said she missed Earth, but she had found something here she had not expected, and she looked at Zara as she said it. The princess turned away quickly, but Katie saw the emotions flickering across her face and realized that whatever was happening between them, Zara felt it too. That night, Zara could not sleep, and she paced her chambers, thinking about how a human prisoner had somehow become the person she most wanted to talk to each day. Her sister Lyra visited again and said the whole palace was talking about the princess and her human, and that their father would return from his diplomatic mission. Soon Zara knew Lyra was right, and that her father would be furious, but she could not bring herself to stop seeing Katie even though she knew it was dangerous. The next morning brought bad news, as guards reported that other prisoners were getting restless, seeing Katie receive special treatment, and some were planning a revolt. Zara had to make a choice between maintaining order through fear or trying something different, and she thought about everything Katie had told her about human ways of solving problems. She ordered all the prisoners brought to the arena, but not for fighting, and everyone, including Katie, wondered what the princess was planning to do. The arena filled with confused prisoners from dozens of different species, all looking around nervously as they were lined up in rows, instead of being prepared for combat. Katie stood among them, feeling just as confused as everyone else, while Princess Zara appeared on her royal platform wearing ceremonial robes that sparkled with embedded gems. The crowd of Velkari citizens filled the seats expecting entertainment, but murmuring with confusion when they saw all the prisoners standing peacefully, instead of fighting. Zara raised her hand for silence and began speaking in a voice that carried to every corner of the arena, saying that she had been thinking about the purpose of these games. She said that for generations the Velkari had used violence to prove their superiority, but one human had shown her that true strength came from choosing not to kill when you could. The crowd began to shout in anger and confusion, while the noble families in their special boxes stood up in protest. But Zara continued speaking over them. She announced that starting today the arena would no longer host death matches, but would become a place for different species to compete in contests of skill and intelligence. The prisoners looked at each other in shock, while Katie stared up at Zara with pride and worry, because she knew this decision would have serious consequences for the princess. A group of military commanders entered the royal platform, and one said loudly that Princess Zara had lost her mind and was bringing shame to the Velkari Empire. Zara faced them without flinching and said that any who wished to challenge her decision could face her in single combat, as was their ancient right. The commanders backed down because everyone knew Princess Zara was one of the finest warriors in the Empire despite her reluctance to embrace violence. But then a voice boomed across the arena, and Emperor Vex appeared on the platform having returned early from his mission. And his face was twisted with rage. He declared that his daughter had been corrupted by weakness and pointed at Katie, saying it was the human female who had poisoned the princess's mind. The Emperor ordered the guards to execute Katie immediately as an example, and several soldiers moved toward her with weapons drawn. Princess Zara stepped between the guards and Katie, shocking everyone, including her father, who had never seen his daughter openly defy him before. She told her father that if they wanted to kill Katie, they would have to go through her first, and the entire arena gasped at this unprecedented act of defiance. Emperor Vex's scales turned dark purple with fury, and he said Zara was no longer his daughter if she would choose a primitive human over her own people. Zara removed her crown and held it out to her father, saying she would rather give up her throne than watch the Empire continue down a path of cruelty and violence. The Emperor took the crown and declared that Princess Lyra would be the new heir and that Zara was banished from the palace effective immediately. Katie pushed through the guards to reach Zara's side and took her hand in front of everyone, which caused another wave of gasps through the crowd. Zara looked down at their joined hands, then up at Katie's face, and something seemed to break inside her as tears formed in her silver eyes. She turned to face the entire arena, still holding Katie's hand, and spoke words that would echo through history, saying she had learned more about strength from this human than from her entire life as royalty. The Emperor ordered the guards to arrest them both, but General Maya, who had served the royal family for decades, stepped forward and said she would not arrest someone for choosing love other. Guards began to lower their weapons, and the crowd fell into confused silence as they watched their princess stand with a human against the Emperor himself. Katie squeezed Zara's hand and whispered that they should leave now while they had the chance, but Zara said she had one more thing to do first. She looked directly at her father and said that history would remember him as the Emperor who chose pride over progress and tradition over truth. Then Zara turned to the crowd and announced that she was leaving Velkari Prime with Katie to explore the galaxy and learn how other species had found peace. Her sister Lyra suddenly stepped forward and removed the crown that had just been placed on her head, saying she did not want to rule an empire built on suffering. The Emperor stood alone on the platform as both his daughters walked down to the arena floor, and Lyra hugged Zara before saying she would try to change things from within. Katie felt overwhelmed by everything happening so fast, but she kept hold of Zara's hand as they walked toward the arena exit with hundreds of prisoners following them. The crowd began to stir, and some started chanting Zara's name while others argued about whether she was a traitor or a hero for choosing love over duty. General Maya ordered her troops to clear a path and told Zara that a ship was waiting at the spaceport if she truly wanted to leave. As they walked through the city streets, more and more Velkari citizens came out to watch, and some even cheered for the princess who had given up everything for her beliefs. At the spaceport, a small crowd of supporters had gathered with supplies and gifts for the journey, and several of the freed prisoners asked if they could travel with them. Zara looked at Katie and asked if she was really ready to leave everything behind and start a new life traveling the stars together. Katie smiled and said she had left Earth looking for adventure and had found something much better, which was someone worth sharing that adventure with. They boarded the ship along with a dozen other beings who wanted to escape Velkari Prime and start fresh somewhere that did not judge them for being different. As the ship lifted off, Zara stood at the window watching her homeworld shrink into the distance, and Katie wrapped her arms around her from behind. Zara leaned back into the embrace and said she had no regrets about choosing love over an empire, and Katie kissed her scaled cheek gently. The ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind the Velkari Empire and heading toward an uncertain but hopeful future where love mattered more than power. The ship drifted through space for 3 weeks while Katie taught Zara about human customs, and Zara helped the other refugees adjust to their new freedom, away from the Empire. Zara often stood at the navigation console staring at the star charts, and Katie knew she was thinking about the home and family she had left behind for love. One morning, Katie found Zara in the observation deck crying silently, and when she asked what was wrong, Zara admitted she had received a message from her sister. Princess Lyra had written that their father had declared Zara dead to the Empire and forbidden anyone from speaking her name in the palace on pain of imprisonment. Katie held Zara close and reminded her that she had not lost everything because she had gained a new family with Katie and the others on the ship. The refugee crew had grown close during their journey and included a young Martian engineer named Lisa who kept their old ship running despite its many problems. There was also an older human man named Paul who had been imprisoned for 10 years and spent his time teaching the alien refugees about human culture. A family of spider-like beings called the Thrix had become the ship cooks after discovering they had a talent for combining foods from different worlds. Zara slowly began to smile more as she realized these people had become her friends and they accepted her not as a princess, but just as herself. Katie suggested they head for New Haven, which was a colony on the edge of human space that welcomed refugees from all species without asking questions. Zara agreed but said she was nervous about meeting more humans since her people had been enemies of Earth for so long, and she feared rejection. Katie kissed her and promised that humans would see what she saw, which was someone brave enough to give up everything for love and peace. As they approached New Haven, the space station, traffic control asked for identification, and Katie explained they were carrying refugees, seeking asylum from the Velkari Empire. There was a long pause, then the controller said, Princess Zara was cleared to dock and that the station administrator wanted to meet with her personally. Katie was surprised they knew who Zara was, but Zara explained that news of her defying the Emperor had spread across the galaxy, faster than their ship could travel. When they docked at New Haven, dozens of humans and aliens were waiting with welcome signs and flowers, which made Zara stop in shock at the entrance. A human woman named Grace who ran the station stepped forward and told Zara that her choice to stand against tyranny had inspired revolts on 3 Velkari colony worlds. Zara could not believe that her personal decision had sparked such widespread
change, and Grace showed her video messages from aliens thanking her for her courage. The station gave them quarters in the diplomatic section, and for the first time in weeks they had privacy and a real bed instead of ship bunks. That night, Zara and
Katie lay together looking out at the stars, and Zara asked if Katie regretted getting involved with someone who had no home or position anymore. Katie turned to face her and said that Zara was wrong, because home was not a place, but the person you chose to be with, and Katie chose her. They made love slowly and gently with Zara, discovering that despite their physical differences, they fit together perfectly in all the ways that mattered. The next morning brought unexpected visitors as 3 Velkari ships arrived at the station causing panic until they transmitted a message of peace. General Maya emerged from the lead ship and told Zara that 1/3 of the military had refused to serve Emperor Vex after he banished his own daughter. She explained that Princess Lyra was secretly working to change laws, while these military defectors had come to pledge their loyalty to Zara instead. Zara was overwhelmed and said she was no longer a princess, but Maya replied that true leadership came from inspiring others, not from wearing a crown. Katie watched with pride as Zara naturally took charge, helping to organize the defectors and refugees into a community on New Haven. Within a month, their section of the station had become known as Little Unity, where different species lived and worked together in harmony. Zara started teaching conflict resolution classes, using methods Katie had taught her, combined with the best parts of Velkari philosophy about honor. Katie, meanwhile, worked with Lisa to repair and upgrade refugee ships, creating a small fleet that could help evacuate others from oppressive systems. They received word that Princess Lyra had successfully passed laws, ending the death games and converting the arena into a cultural exchange center. Emperor Vex was reportedly furious but could not reverse the changes without admitting his other daughter was also defying him, which would show weakness. Paul started a news service that broadcast stories of successful integration between species to counter the propaganda from the Velkari Empire. The Thrix family opened a restaurant that became famous for fusion cuisine and proved that different species could create beautiful things together. One day, a young Velkari girl approached Zara at the market and said she had run away to find the princess who chose love over power. Zara knelt down to the girl's level and told her she was not a princess anymore, just someone trying to build a better life with the person she loved. Girl asked if it was worth giving up a throne for love, and Zara looked over at Katie, who was laughing with Lisa about something. She told the girl that power was meaningless compared to having someone who saw you for who you really were and loved you anyway. More refugees arrived daily, and New Haven expanded to accommodate them, while other human colonies began opening their doors to escapees from the Empire. Katie and Zara moved into a proper apartment with a view of the docking bays where they could watch ships arrive carrying people seeking freedom. At night, they would sit on their balcony planning ways to help more people escape and building a network of safe passages across the galaxy. Zara received another message from Lyra saying that their father had fallen ill, and the doctors believed it was from the stress of losing both daughters. Part of Zara wanted to return, but Katie reminded her that going back would mean death or imprisonment, and would waste everything they had built. Instead, Zara sent a message to her father saying she forgave him and hoped that someday he would understand that love was not weakness, but the greatest strength.